Hello, everyone. This is Hannah Imperial Cannon with Xencelabs. I want to introduce myself. I am head of business development here, and we are joined with William Winkler. He's an instructor over at Samford University. Today, he's going to be talking about digital painting with Photoshop. And Wink, please take it away.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So let's go ahead. I want to pull up my slides real quick and I'll share my screen. Slides are for me. That's really the conversation. All right. So I hope everyone's doing well. I've had a great Lightbox so far, so I'm really happy to be here.
And you've done a couple sessions, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been able to join in, watch a few, and it's been great. All right, so we're going to share this screen. And can everyone see what I'm doing over here? I hope so. Can you see him?
Yes, you're on. You're good.
Super cool. So I kind of made like a series of like, what I want to talk about and ordered it up and put together like how I'm going to explain my process and procedures and how I do paintings like this and how I work inside of Photoshop, creating creatures and illustrations. And I thought, well, first I should probably tell people like who I am. If you weren't in my talk with Travis yesterday, you would have no idea. So I'm Wink. I've worked in the industry since about 2004, 2005. Really depends if you count college, because I went to Full Sail in 2004. Before that, I worked in high school, actually, for companies doing charcoal illustrations of celebrities and people that would contract in the company to do like family portraits and stuff. It's a lot of fun. And I've really focused on humans for a long time. And I did a lot of studying and wanted to be a Disney animator growing up. And then, the studio shut down. So I left college and went and learned 3D. And after there, I worked for EA as a tester. But while I was there, I started doing more contract and freelance work and really built up a giant client portfolio. I mean, I've worked with thousands of different companies and individuals doing work over the years. And I left there. I worked for CBS doing 3D motion graphics. I worked at Digital Domain. I worked at Stereo D. I worked for the Nickelodeon Hotel. I worked for Steamroller Studios and just tons of people. Then later started my own company, and then I started creating curriculum for school systems and kind of expanded upon that throughout the time. I've got licensed work by Stanley Collectibles, and Stan Lee was signing my paintings before he passed. I've done some other really cool things, and if you guys want to get to know me more, follow my Instagram. I tagged it down there at the bottom of the frames. And then as well as I work with Travis on Sketch to Animate as well. And we do like a live Twitch stream and different stuff on top of that. And you can check us out there. We also have a discount for anyone here at Lightbox, an early bird discount for a workshop, a master's level workshop we're teaching in October. So go to sketchtoanimate.com and check that out. So what I do here for digital painting in Photoshop is based on how I paint in real life and how I do charcoals, acrylics, and watercolor. And I took a lot of those traditional techniques and I carried them over to digital when I really started taking off into digital illustration about 10, 12 years ago. And I had always used a tablet and since the beginning, and I kind of grew with that process. And then sometimes the hardware didn't really match up with the software. And I think everything started to like really come together about 12 years ago. And I started to do these digital color paintings. And one thing that really stood out to make a difference was shapes, not line. So I'm going to go back over here, kind of where I begin the process. And I'm going to peel back a few of these layers here. And I'll talk about like how I really start with just getting over the fear that the page is blank. So I usually put like a textured background. I'll embellish what I'm doing here with these gray lines and blurs and kind of create something interesting to create visual breakup. Usually this is for concept art or working out an idea for a character, or sometimes I use them for practice before I do digital sculpting, and then I carry that over. So starting with this really gets over the fear. I think most people really get scared as to whether the head's too tall or too wide or too fat, and I just really kind of block out color. Then I do a loose sketch on top, and I just kind of come through, and this is the only time I really use line, is coming through and kind of place, like, you know, my facial markers, just like you do in your figure drawing classes. And at this point, I'm going to plug in that if you're not taking figure drawing classes or workshops or tutorials, do so. Figure drawing, while drawing humans is getting a little bit more automated with AI systems and stuff, all of that is built upon the foundation that we make monsters and creatures out of. So it's really important that you work on being able to draw a figure. So I work on this. I do a little bit of lighting. I start doing some color breakup. One big thing that I do in this stage is in the forehead, I use a lot of yellows. In the mouth area, I use a lot of blues and purples. And I use a lot of reds and oranges inside of the eyes. And that's because of the colors that are naturally being created in most nationalities. In the forehead, you're really getting these kind of high keratin tones that come through. And the red comes through in your eyes because all back here is just fleshy water stuff, right? So behind the eyelids, a lot of those tones are going to come through. And you're going to get these purple blue tones around your lips and in your lips and your mouth area and the lower your below your nose. So it's tend to bleed through. So even on darker skinned people, like this one here, we're doing that. I based this sketch off of what I kind of envisioned my niece would look like when she grows up. My niece is a Hopi Native American, and so she's kind of with her heritage and what she'll end up looking like as she grows older, as well as she starts to embody some of the cultural pieces that come along with her attire and look. This is basically something that she might look like when she's over with her tribe. So from here, I build upon the shadows. So if you start with the idea of like where your light source is coming from, then you'll really start to like move forward. So at this point in time, this is typically like 30 to 45 minutes into the drawing. And the big reason why I wanted to get through this process and I gave you guys or did the Photoshop drawing first was that I wanted to take you guys through my process as quickly as I could because I know we really only have about 45 minutes here. And to take you just to here, this is where a lot of people are able to get to. It's the next stages and how to work through these technical like tips and tricks are really where things start to get hairy. No pun intended about hair. So I block through this process and then I go through and I do something called light and speck. So at this point, I use a splatter brush. So if you go over to here and you come in and you check out Kyle's brushes, the Mega Pack is a fantastic kit. It's got a lot of things in here. Using sponges and splatters will give you these effects where you can actually start to create splotches of skin, and that creates that color breakup. You're going to hear me about subsurface scattering later on in the conversation, but that really starts to produce that subsurface scattering where the skin has different breakups of keratin. And if the skin is natural and not covered in makeup or anything like that, that's what it's going to start to look like. So we create this like below area where we're breaking up the skin tones and it's not even anymore. And then we're going to color pick off of this to create all of the rest of the colors from here. We might do some simple color adjustments, but it makes the workflow faster. And based on that faster process, hotkeys are huge. And if you have really big hands, doing those crazy Vulcan grips across a full-size keyboard can be possible, but the majority of people have a difficult time reaching all the keys. And it's really hard to do without your mind like plugged in and you're looking at the keyboard. And I try to work as ergonomically as possible. So I'm a big fan of the quick keys. The quick keys allow me to plug in. So I hold it like this, like I do a phone. I put my pinky on the bottom, fingers in the back, and then I use my thumb to reach everything. So for me, I'm able to put space at the bottom, which allows me to pan and zoom my piece. So if I were to switch over to zoom, right, and if I'm in here and I want to move around across the eye, I just hold spacebar and everything gets a little bit faster for me. I can switch to brush as well. So if I had a layer selected, I'd be able to switch to the brush key. And if that's just too big, I tap twice and I get to my scroll wheel and I can make this larger or smaller much quicker, switch back to zoom, and I'm able to do a lot more faster. I also use the brush and dropper. So switching between brush and dropper, like I said, once I do this color breakup, I'm picking off colors right here to try and get to what I want. The last one I use really often is switch. So I'm switching between my foreground and background color. Like I said, I treat this like a traditional painting. So I typically go through that. So again, big fan. Hotkeys really helps. And if you guys want any tips and tricks on how to set up that, I can go over that at the end too. So if we come back over here, like I said, I'm constantly using color pickers and try and speed up my process. So switching to this method, these used to take me like 12 to 18 hours to do, and now I'm getting them inside of like 4 to 8, depending on how quickly I can get through my concepts, and sometimes the likeness comes off a little quicker. Then I got in here and I started to rethink like how I wanted to do the hair. So I was thinking about how Princess Leia was done, and Princess Leia's hair is actually based off of a Hopi Native American like traditional hairstyle. And so I started to like lean in that direction. Later on in the drawing, I go back away from it and make it more funky looking, but this was part of my process. So at this point, I made some simple touches up like in the attire and started to bring it forward. And I did a pass on color and light in the cloth. So if I kind of went through this and talked about like my points would be that use brushes, right? Don't just try and use the round brush to do everything. I get a lot of comments about the Hugh Laurie painting that I did. And if you see it on my Instagram, it's there. That was made entirely from the round brush. I was on this kick where I wanted to see if I could make like really awesome paintings with just it. And I can, it takes forever and it doesn't really look very artistic, and personal opinions, right? But it's possible. But if you use brushes, they do a lot of work for you and they help make your piece feel a little more artistic. Then from there, I'm a big fan of the transform and Gaussian blur. So the blur tool will kill computers. If you start getting into like painting these, this is a 36 by 24 turned in landscape and 300 DPI. So it's a pretty big image. And if I were to use the blur tool, I'm pretty sure Photoshop will just shut down. And I run 64 gigs of RAM. So it's a lot. I already talked about using color breakup and splatter, and simply anatomy is really important, right? To help get to these points. And really where I wanted to get to at this point and like talking to you guys about like tips and tricks is move in, move out, and move around. Sounds like a dance move, right? But the idea is that if you work too tight, too small, I tend to work zoomed out. So where I'm at here, right, I'm typically painting this size, this large, with a brush that's closer to like this the majority of the time. Even when I'm doing those lines, I'm typically just using a very light touch and using the pressure sensitivity on the tablet. So I go through that. And like I said, I move out and around. I wanted to show that at this point because when I do like the cloth and light, I started to maybe put like a cross stitch in there. I decided to not. I went and did more color pass and then review the shadows here. And I moved out and around. And then I start to come back and I move back up to her face. I adjust the color in her face, and then I move back over and adjust the color in the clothing.
Hey, Wink, I see you use a lot of layers.
I
How do
do.
you determine to change layers?
So I typically change layers when I think about a topic. So if
Mhm.
I'm painting color on clothes, I'll do color on clothes, and then I make a new layer. I
Mm,
don't always name them. I named them mainly for you guys because I'm reviewing back over it. But I do chunk them together. And
mhm,
sometimes I'll use a layer mask, and I'll use a layer mask on the layer or a folder of it to kind of clean up the outside edge.
mm.
Or I also use clipping masks sometimes if I want to adjust the color of something. But yeah, big fan of layers. Uh,
Mm,
I also compress. At some point in time, I can feel the computer chugging a little bit,
mhm.
and that's somewhere around, like layer like 150, 200, and then I might collapse the painting and just paint over it. It saves me a little bit of memory and allows me to keep pushing the piece further. So at this point, I typically would take the painting further forward, right? And at this part, I've kind of done color blocking, and I focused on getting away from the fear. I use big brushes. I do the color bars. I've done my basic sketch. I've done some light and shadow. I moved out and around, and I did some of that low opacity and subsurface scattering stuff here. And this is really where I start to bring in like my tricks, or I think they're my tricks, right? Is I come back in here, and this is about where this was, and I do this called a pullback phase. So basically, I take the skin tones and I start doing samplings, quick samplings in here with a low opacity, typically like 15 or 20, and I start blending the skins together because my skin might have lots of breakup in it, but it doesn't have that much breakup in it. And so most areas are going to be similar, like tonal areas. And then as the direction changes, I'll start to see a color change in here, but this allows me to create simple breakup. Then on top of that, I can start to even the skin. And the last part I bring in that's really like a trick for you guys to handle is when hair comes down, right? If I were drawing myself, I have hair, like wispy hairs that kind of hang down here. I can't draw those in yet because I want to get a nice transitional like look at this skin as it goes below there, because I'm going to see through the hair in the end product. So I pull back the hair. Once I know that I've got my facial features on right, and they're not, I cover that later. But like once I kind of get into there, I can start to blend back in this skin and ignore the hairlines that are in there and try to create what it looks like underneath the hair, because this is going to be a little more wispy up front.
Mhm.
Um,
We have a question.
yeah, let's take it.
Do you want? Okay. So we have Chelsea who asks, what would you say is the percentage between drawing and adjustment mask layers used in your process?
I'd say I'm like 98% drawing and like 2% adjustments. You'll
Mm,
start to see like I'm coming in here. Most of the time, these adjustments, like with masks, are just cleaning up my like splatters around the edge. I don't
mhm,
even like to pull them back completely in my style. Um, I just kind of want to make sure that there's no like red speckles over here, because I was just going wild with like a splatter brush or a low opacity brush to try and get a look and feel.
mm.
And that gives me the ability to use bigger brushes and move faster than trying to keep real tight with a tiny brush around the edge. I also come in through and I even the skin more. So through evening the skin, I might work on the highlighted tones and really start to block this out in chunky bits. And then I started to do hair here, right? And you can see like I did like very little, and then I was like, I don't like this, real quickly. So at this point, I said, well, let me try and get a critique. So I'm a big fan of getting critiques from your peers. You can start to point out things that you haven't seen yet. Like I didn't notice her left eye looks really messed up because I've been staring at this for a couple hours. And so I brought it over to Travis and I said, hey man, what are you doing? Would you mind doing a draw over real quick? So he did a draw over and kind of pointed out like some spatial sizing things and how to change the perspective on some of the clothing here and some adjustments. And I was like, oh, that's great points. Cool. I like what you're saying here. So I applied these notes in the next phase. So let's see here. Then I would move on to here, which is the next pass, which was hair. So hair is a big question I get a lot. And again, the hair changes very drastically from this point. But this is the part where I can start to show you what I did. So these big black sections, because she does have dark hair, really turn into the shadows of the hair. And I started to implement some of those gray tones and light tones of what it looks like when light's hitting the section. Then I bring back in color. So even black hair isn't actually black. It has like a color to it. And they're usually built upon like other colors. So some characters may be like blue toned hair, but brown toned hair or red toned hair is really common for darker black hair. And so I gave her brown tones because I've seen her hair in real life. And I started to bring in some of those like wispy sections where I wanted them to come in and block in like the spacing for it. Then I use a large chunky black brush and start to bring in some of those tones there. It's not true black. It's close to black, like probably 95%. And I use some scattering in the colors. So I go into the brush dynamics here. So brush settings, and I'll use color dynamics, and I can do flicker between the foreground and background jitter. So every time that I'm painting, it will adjust between like a 90% black and a 95% black. Or you can put like tone up like the browns a little more in my foreground and background color. And that actually starts to create a lot of breakup in between each stroke without me having to do any extra work. Then I'll come through and put in like a low opacity and kind of create more breakup in the hair here. This pass really didn't do much. Added more wispy-like areas to the forehead hair, and brought this back in. And at this point, I was like, I don't really like the hair. So I'm going to change the design again. So we evolve into the next piece, and I'm like, delete and start over. If you ever take a class with me on 3D or any of the things, I'm a big fan of just starting over. Sometimes it's not worth, but I do keep kind of where I was. And so at this point, like you were saying, like I love layers, right? So I flattened the base piece and I identified the issue with the eyes. And so I made all these like tweaks. And this is where I'm using the power of Photoshop. So I actually came in and I took the work and I selected areas and pasted them up into the work, and actually just pasted and shifted them around because I needed to move and adjust them. And then I did a quick paint over to blend in the edge. And then I pasted it in a new adjustment, and then I painted over the edge. Then I brought in shadows again. I went and worked on the nose some more. I moved in, and then I moved out, and I moved around. Worked on the lips, painted on the eyes a little more, darkened up the shadows that are in there, brought in the eyelashes, worked on the laugh line a little more, and then I was like, all right, let's keep going. So again, that draw over that Travis had done, I brought the eyes up a little higher to make her older and started moving away from a very young version of her. Then I pushed big shadows, nice soft shadows, and then I used that masking to block it off. And then hair. Here's where I started to redo the hair. So it made a big change because I re-blocked out like what had been there using the same methods. And then in the new hair pass, you can see that I used a bunch of layers and started to break out like wispy sections out here. I started to use light colors and tones to break up the hair. And even though it's still very dark, it still has like tone to it. And on a nice bright screen where it's intended for print and CMYK, So right now it's an RGB because I converted it for you guys. But the original intention was to be able to print this. And so it's got a lot of change out in color there. The other sections that I typically do that are like different is I use opacity somewhere in between the blends of like 10 and 20%. Everything after here, I'm never using like full flat color. Everything is in low opacity. Everything is in layers. Everything is using color breakup, like the color jitter, and switching in between my foreground and background color, because it really starts to blend this in. The next stage I use typically is, at this point, I would go through and do big pushes. So I found the colors were really muted. So I basically just took a large orange, and I can disable this here real quick. So I just used a large orange and went over all of her skin because she has a very orange tone to her skin. And then I just put in a mask to rub it off the sides there. And then I just lowered the opacity till it gave me a tonal quality that I wanted with a soft light. Then I did the same with the red tones, and I brought the tones back up in the shirt area. Then after that, I would pretty much take this piece and just keep pushing in those same directions. I might add a little more texture to the clothing, but I tend to want everyone to focus on the face and the character features versus texture in the clothes, because I'm using them for concepts. And I could just say, this is made of burlap. So when you do that, make it out of burlap. But as long as the cloth acts like burlap, it's fine. And that's kind of like my process. How are we doing on time? I know I just talked a lot, but do we have any questions?
Yeah, not too many, actually. You have a lot of watchers.
Yeah, there's quite a few people in here. I know the big thing that I do the most is I'm constantly switching in between my brushes. I know that when I got some critiques from other great artists that I follow, or traditional artists, was that if you stick with the same brush and the same brush size too often, you're going to find yourself looking at what looks like a very like boring painting. It's just not going to have a lot of like natural texture built in.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping the brush size large, and as you get more into details, you can make it smaller, but concern yourself more with the idea that that needs to go away. That you're keeping your pen light and the brush comes in from there. So if I were to bring this back up, large opacity, this, if I press harder, it will actually start to draw in.
I have a question for you, Wink, personally. So I know you've had a wonderful career so far, and I've met you a couple of years back. What keeps you motivated? And because you've jumped a lot of different studios and schools, what keeps you motivated?
Keeps me motivated. Honestly, I love what I do. So working on all these like interesting projects is one major piece that keeps me motivated. I also enjoy getting to work with different people. So I've moved around studios or worked on a lot of contract projects because I like the idea of doing different things. So working for like a theme park at one contract for 3 to 6 months, to work a concert or festival for the next 3 months. And one thing is it's always feast or famine, right? So you're constantly taking additional work, and sometimes you kind of over throttle, sometimes you're a little light, but as long as you keep pressing forward, you're gonna stay employed and get to work with cool people. And there's a lot of referrals that come from that process too.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Where do you get the referrals? Because I know a lot of students ask me that all the time as well. How do you find the work?
I find the work most often because someone referred me. I'll get a lot of emails or contacts, and
So it's like one project and then they liked it and then they'll.
yep.
Tell
like
somebody else.
I've worked with you before and you've referred me
Yes.
to people who were saying, we're looking for somebody. Do you know anyone who does this? And you're like, oh yeah, he does. And he does a great job, right? Same thing with Travis. And the coin goes around the same way, like when I know someone who's looking for something, I refer my friends. And so referring other people for jobs is one of the best ways to get them to refer you for a job later, because they'll want to return the favor.
Oh, I agree with that. I think it's a very small industry and we all need to support ourselves, our community, the artists. We need each other.
Yes. It is much smaller than most people intend.
Yes. I have a couple more questions. They're starting to roll in here.
Sure.
What techniques do you implement in each of your pieces?
Techniques I implement each piece. I always use the splatter brush. So I will always come in here, grab the brush. I'll find a nice splatter. Let's look for one here. Here we go. Supreme splatter, right? And I will make a large brush size. And when I'm working on, before I get to like the skin smoothing layer,
Mhm.
come over here and choose the like underlying skin tones, which for her are very like orangey browns and reds. And
Mhm.
then I will adjust the color dynamics, like I said here, and we'll adjust the hue jitter a little bit, saturation, brightness, purity you can keep there. And I'm switching in between these foreground and background colors so that each stroke is a little bit different.
Do you customize your brushes a lot?
Almost every time.
Oh, you do?
Yep, whole lot.
And then you mentioned a brush pack. Do you buy different brush packs or search? How do you find those too?
Different artists I follow sometimes will release them, and I try to support the artists that I like. So if they've got a brush pack for $5-10, I'll
Mhm.
always buy it, and then I'll make it a point to make a piece of artwork only using their brushes.
Mm.
And then
Is it?
sometimes, but I mean, before Kyle got picked up by Adobe, I bought all of his brush packs,
Oh,
and
yeah.
his are now all free within Adobe because they bought like all of it, I think. So I use this splatter type method, and then
Mhm.
I'll drop the opacity on it, and then I'll come in and switch colors, right? And then I might change the brush size and go something smaller. And this kind of technique here, I drop the opacity like really low, but it creates breakup in the skin tones. And I use this technique a lot. And then I can always put a mask on it and kind of pull it back on areas where there's not so much breakup, like the high cheeks in the middle of the forehead and the tip of the nose. And then I'll blend it in as I continue to paint through the process. But that's one technique that like I use almost every single time that I paint.
Do you usually paint mostly digitally or do you do any like actual real painting?
I do a lot of traditional painting, but not as much anymore.
Mhm.
I like to work with watercolor and acrylic,
Mm.
but because I work in production so often, I typically work an average of like 60 to 80 hours a week between all the different work that I do.
Yeah, that's a
So
lot.
I don't really have a lot of time to get to work with some traditional mediums. So usually they're more research based now for me,
Mm.
um, but or straight pleasure, because I'm not making like oil paintings to then sell. I'm making oil paintings because I want to learn more.
Oh,
But
nice.
I get hired a lot to do digital paintings, and
Mhm.
they need them digitally because that's the end product. So I'm a big promoter of like, learning how to use a tablet, drawing on a tablet often, using a tablet as your main tool,
Mhm.
kind of carrying through that process, and then working digitally when creating art. If you're thinking about making this a profession, that you would sell the work and do work for companies.
Mhm. Very cool. I know I don't use, I don't paint much traditionally anymore either.
Kind of hard.
We have a few more questions. How do you choose your colors? And you were talking a lot about some interesting colors and skin tones earlier. So, and I guess there's lots of layers to that, like you're saying with the splatter brush.
So I typically do like I said, I use a wash of like a yellow, a
Mhm.
blue, and a red across these three zones on the face. And how I choose colors, I look at reference. If my subject is going to be a monster, okay, is it a blue monster? What kind of creatures or lizards or reptiles have blue skin? And I kind of go study like what happens when the skin gets closer to like, say, like in between their arm or in between their neck. Is the skin get darker? Is it more meaty? And I start to like use research moments like that. And then I pick big colors, and then I do a lot of those opacity and splatter techniques, and those produce additional colors that I'm not making, and I can color pick as I paint. So I don't make a palette across here. Just in the beginning, when I'm doing that like first color block out section, and I get to here, I pick a lot of my colors off of this. And then if I find that they're not rich enough or orangey enough or whatever, I will use low opacities and do a wash and do like a pass-through layer, or um, I use soft light a lot or overlays. So if I put a pass of color on top, and then I will wash it through.
Oh, nice. Well, the next question you kind of answered. Do you research prior to a piece or just go for it?
Sometimes I'll just like sketch because I have an idea in my head, and but I always draw from reference. I always have I'm running 4 screens right now. You guys don't see. I have 3 right here that are like 19-inch screens, and then I have a 72-inch TV on the back. The TV honestly plays Netflix a lot, but
Mhm.
if I need like more visuals or more space or text or something, I'll put that up there, and then I kind of work along here. And one screen is almost entirely dedicated to just reference images, even if it's just a Google tab, and I'm kind of switching through stuff to try and find things as I
Oh,
think.
wow. I've got Drewby looking real good, wink, is what he said.
How you doing?
And then Jose earlier, Jose Suarez says hello. And John Luce,
How's it going, guys?
hello, and thank you for this tutorial.
Of course.
I think we're pretty much out of time though. So Wink, I just want to always thank you for, your support and, supporting Xencelabs and utilizing the tablet and for the tips and tricks. That's really great to have you and always a pleasure to work with you.
No, it's fantastic. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
And then if anyone has any more questions, we have like maybe 1 more minute. I'm going to put a thank you card. There's a lot of information in the YouTube information down below. And Lightbox, there's a Lightbox special for Xencelabs pen tablet. I think it's like 10% off. So
Yeah.
check the links. And if you're walking the artist alley, take a look and try to find our element, that beautiful little yellow icon up there. There's a chance to win some great prizes. And with that, thank you, Wink. Really appreciated this.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.